Good morning. It's good to see y'all at Branches today. If we haven't met before, again, my name is Colin, and I'm so glad that you're here in this third week of Advent. We're in a series called Icons, you see from the video today, looking at how God's life and his character and the values and the characteristics he wants we to have show up in our lives that reflect his life, that reflect who God is, that reflect the love that he wants to share with the whole world, just universally with every person. And so we've been talking over the past few weeks about the ordinary ways we can show up in the world that other people can experience the love of God. And we can show up in the world in really kind of mundane ways and just show by our kindness and our love who God is and who he is for us. And we talked about Abraham, and we've talked about Moses and their faith and their trust and their resilience. And today we're talking about Ruth, who's a really important person, not just in her own right or her own story, but for the beginning of Jesus' story as we make our way to that on Christmas Eve. And so we're so glad you're here today. If it's your first time here, I would love if you would either scan this QR code here on the screen, or there's a card in front of you that says connect. You can scan the QR code there on the back and let us know that you were here today. It's a great way for us to connect with you, let you know what's going on in the life of our community, just welcome you, get you on the email list so you can know what's coming up, especially as we start a new year of ministry this coming January, all the great ways you can connect in groups and discipleship with other people and service and community. We hope that you'll take that opportunity. And in that same way, there's another card that says Next Steps in front of you. You can look at that card, scan that QR code, or go to the URL there and see everything that's coming up, especially in this Christmas season and our Christmas Eve times and all that. And then also, we're really proud to have our second edition of the Branches Leaf out today. So yeah, super stoked about that. So you can get those on the tables right now or on your way out today. You can meet our audio engineer, James, hear a little bit more about him. Yes, the man behind the scenes there who could just cut me off at any moment, you know. We love James, and he'd get some thrifting advice, get a little teaser of some upcoming series here at Branches, so we hope that you'll grab one of those. It's also a great way to invite someone. And speaking of invitations, we still have invitation cards, and especially in this Christmas season, we'd love if you would take one of these and give them to a friend or a neighbor or coworker. And you know, a lot of people may be wondering, they may even wonder out loud to you, like, hey, I want to go to Christmas Eve, Christmas worship service sometime. Will you let me know where you go, or do you have any tips or ideas? And you can give them one of these, and we'd love to see him here at Branches on Christmas Eve. So take one of those on your way out too. We're talking about Ruth. People outside the Christian religion and outside the religion of Judaism and other people that kind of see Ruth as a religious text view Ruth as a great story. It is a really wonderful story. It's beautifully constructed. It doesn't seem kind of haphazard. Whoever told the story of Ruth had like this kind of end in mind. It has a particular kind of energy to it that kind of pulls you along through the plot. It helps you care about the characters. You really get invested in this short story about Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi, and Boaz, and then the people in their family who have died. And so when I read Ruth, and I reread it again a couple of times in preparation for this week, there's just all these facets to Ruth's story that capture me in new ways. And I've shared this before, I know many of you are too, but I'm a reader. I love to read. My pile grows faster than I'm able to read. And the worst thing is like they keep coming out with more books. If you like look in my screenshots folder in my photos on my phone, it's predominantly books. 75% of which I will never read probably, which is a really great tragedy. You know, like there's not enough time to read all these, even at like 1.5 or 2.0 speed on Audible. You can't get through them fast enough or whatever. But I try to read a lot. And that's because, I mean, like maybe you know this by like looking on the internet or on Instagram or on TikTok or YouTube or whatever else, but like books are doing really well. Like people like books, which is cool. Because I like books. There's a YouTuber I really like. His YouTube name is Books Are Sick, and I couldn't agree more. Books are sick. And it's really cool because like he wasn't a reader, and then somebody gave him a book. I can't remember which one, but it really got him into reading, and so he's kind of tracing his reading journey. It's like he's making it big on YouTube, doing something I've been doing for years, which is just reading books and talking about them. I learned recently that one of the flagship Barnes & Noble stores that was closed down not all that long ago when books weren't as sick, weren't doing as well. They were sick in the bad way. Closed down and became something else, like a Walgreens. Has now been reclaimed and is a Barnes & Noble again. It was like, won't he do it? You know, like resurrection, God bringing back a dead Barnes & Noble. Really, really great. But there's like 400 million TikToks that have the tag book talk, people talking about books. And like, that's one of my pieces of my algorithm. It's like just feeding me book content constantly. And one of the conversations that I've been seeing recently, that I was kind of confused by, but I think it's like an interesting thought experiment, is people talking about their favorite books of 2024. And they're saying, like, I like this one because I'm a character person. Like, I care about character. I want to know every detail about this person's life. I want to dig into their backstory. I want to know more and more about them. Or someone will say, like, I really like this book because I'm a plot person. Like, I want to see what happens next. Like, I want to, like, be wondering about these characters while I'm away doing something else. I want to really, like, dig into it. I want to stay up late so I know what happens next. I want every twist and turn. I mean, like, we know, ideally, we have both. Like, really good character, really good plot. I'm reading Brandon Sanderson books right now. Big fan personally. They're really big, take a while to get through. I asked ChatGPT, there's a new one that came out and I really, really want to get to the new one. I asked ChatGPT to help me come up with a reading plan so I could get there quicker. And ChatGPT, it remembers stuff about you, it'll remember where you work and what you're trying to do or whatever, kind of keeps those things in memory. It's yeah, here's what you could do, but this might get in the way of your Bible reading plan. Shut up, ChatGPT. But also remember me in the future kind of rule of the machines or whatever. And it's one of those books where it's it has both good character, I really am deeply invested in these people, and this plot is kind of carrying you along, you can't wait to see what happens next. Who are the character people in the room? Character people that care about characters, dig into the characters, let's go, nice. Plot driven, the twist and the turn, yeah, plot people. And again, ideally, we have both. There's a philosopher writer, Albert Camus, and he says that fiction is the lie that tells the truth. I think that's really, really profound. Fiction is the lie that tells the truth. That when we read a work of fiction, when we watch a television show, or we watch a movie that we really, really care about, and the character draws us in, or the plot draws us in, part of the reason that it draws and draws on us and pulls on our heart is because it tells something true about us. Maybe even something that's true that we don't want to hear about us, it reflects humanity in some way, or reflects some shortcoming we have, or some hurt, or some pain, or some brokenness, or maybe some hope, or some longing that we have, some beautiful part of humanity. Landon and I just rewatched the most recent Little Women adaptation, and it's character and plot. Greta Gerwig really beautifully interweaves the stories, back and forth, these kind of side-by-side timelines of these little women growing up and learning things about themselves and changing, and we see more about who they are. And it's fiction, it's a fictionalized version of the author's life, but it's a fiction that tells the truth about humanity. When you think about the stories that move you, the stories that have transformed your life, the books that you recommend to everyone, the movies that you recommend to everyone, they're lies, ultimately, that tell the truth. When we read Ruth's story, we come to the Bible, so it's a story, it's a truth that tells the truth, but it still has that ring of kind of a fictional story, of an authored story, of a cared for story to communicate a truth about who we are and about who God is. So I want to read how the story concludes, how Ruth's story ends, and we'll begin there together this morning. So we're at the very last chapter of Ruth chapter 4, starting in verse 13, so the last chunk of the story of Ruth, and it says this. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and when they came together, the Lord made her conceive, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has borne him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her bosom and became his nurse. The women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." And they named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the descendants of Perez. Perez became the father of Hezron, Hezron of Ram, Ram of Amminadab, Amminadab of Nahshon, Nahshon of Salmon, Salmon of Boaz, Boaz of Obed, and Obed of Jesse, and Jesse of David. Friends, this is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. I want to give just a rundown of the character and the plot of Ruth's story. John August Swanson, an incredible painter, he actually just died a few years ago, and he retells Ruth's story in 12 panels. John August Swanson's paintings depict these. You can just Google him and look at all the ways he's depicted biblical stories in his art, and they were displayed in the seminary I went to. Really, really wonderful works of art. And you see here, you can't read them, it's kind of small, but if you look at it online, you can read. He captioned each one. But I want to take you through Ruth's story if you haven't heard before, or at least a refresher for you, and just kind of look at each of these images as we go through Ruth's story together. So the very top left panel, we begin in a really sorry, sad place. In the middle of this story where Naomi, who's an Israelite, has 2 sons and a husband, and they've all died. It's an awful way to begin a story, and a kind of tragic way to begin a story. And there's the burial here with her 2 daughters-in-law. And just so you know the background, you could probably already guess this, and we've talked about it the past couple of weeks, but not a lot has changed from Abraham to Moses to now Ruth and Naomi's story. It's a patrilineal society. Every good thing, every piece of money, every piece of property, every future hope was rooted in the sons and their sons and their sons. So you would read the story, with the background and think, what are Naomi and Orpah and Ruth going to do? That's where we begin the story. And that second panel there, Naomi has kind of said, you go your way, I'll go mine. I have no hope. I'm old. I'm not going to get married again. I'm not going to have children again. My husband is dead. My sons are dead. You guys go out and figure something out. My new name is Mara, which means bitter. I'm bitter. I'm empty. I've lost everything. Chart a new course. I'm going to go somewhere else and just in my life that way. And so they're going to go their own way. But then in the third panel, you see Ruth has embraced Naomi, kind of renaming her too. Like, you're not Mara, you're Naomi. And it's really, really beautiful. It says in the NRSV, which we read today, in that third panel, Ruth clings to Naomi. It has a kind of physicality to it. She embraces her. She holds onto her. She grips onto her. She clings to Naomi. She's like, I'm not going to leave you. Your God's going to be my God. Your people are going to be my people. I'm going to be yours. You're going to be mine. And they kind of reforge this relationship. Again, reading the story, seeing it in a play, hearing it retold, especially with this background, if you're an Israelite person or if you're a Moabite like Ruth, you would have thought, why is she doing this? She's dooming herself. She's tying herself to a person who has no hope, who has no future, who has no horizon. Why would she do this? But Ruth has this deep love, this loyal love for Naomi, and she attaches herself to her. She's here today, so I can say, not everybody has this great relationship with their mother-in-law either. And so this is also kind of a wonder too. She had an out. She didn't have to go hang out with her mother-in-law. But here she is, really wonderful. I would cling to you, Jennifer. If you had, don't worry. So they go back to Naomi's homeland into Bethlehem, and people start talking. It causes this stir. Naomi's back, and her family is dead, and she's brought her Moabite daughter-in-law. Again, more background for you is that there was racial animus for Moabites in Israel. And I listened to Tim Keller's sermon on Ruth this week. It was really great. He was he was really facetious, wonderful, smart guy. And he says, it's so good that we've kind of risen above racial animus in our time. This story has no application for us there. It's just kind of an interesting historical fact, But they come in and it's like this outsider has now come into our community. That's what they're kind of gossiping and talking about and in wonder her coming there. Here Naomi in this fifth panel here, she sends Ruth to go out and glean in the field. It's like the beginning of harvest time. She goes to glean in the fields, which means take the harvested extras. That's what poor people did. As people gleaned their own fields, they allowed the poor to come gather up what they could from what was left behind. So she's out there, and it's just a sign. Ruth and Naomi are nobody. They're nobody economically. They're nobody culturally. Naomi has brought in this outsider with her, so she's kind of ostracized herself in some way. She has no future, no hope, and just her going out to glean in the fields is just another marker in her life and in Naomi's life that they just got to scrounge up what they can. They're nobody. But things start to turn in the sixth panel there, in this middle part of the story. There's Boaz down there, so second row, second panel over. And he's like, who's that? Which is my favorite part of the story. He's like, anybody know that lady gleaning in my field? It's Ruth. She's Naomi's daughter-in-law. And you go to the next panel, he tells her, you can glean in my field all you want. Greatest pickup line of all time, glean in my field all you want. And so she's grateful, she's kind of in that posture there, thank you so much. And then the connection is made that Boaz, this person who's noticed beautiful Ruth gleaning in his field, is in a family way connected to Naomi and is given this title in most every English translation, a kinsman redeemer. Without getting too deep in what a kinsman redeemer is that a kinsman redeemer was a family member, maybe even a distant family member, but your closest male family member who could redeem your sorry state, could marry you back into the community, could marry you and then give you an economic hope and a future, could marry one of your daughters or some other family member of you to kind of like restore this broken familial relationship that's happened with the death of Naomi's family, her sons and her husband. And so Boaz knows this. Naomi notices this, and she's like, yes, glean in Boaz's field, and then this bottom panel here, go find him at night and look nice and remind him that he actually has a legal obligation to me, to Naomi's family, to be my kinsman redeemer, to redeem this thing. That God has done this thing in our family, and he's offering us a way out through Boaz. The other facet of this too is that Boaz is actually kind of putting himself on the line. He's clinging to Ruth romantically and also clinging to Naomi if he accepts by saying like, look, I'm going to bring in this kind of mixed Moabite family into my family. I'm going to redeem them. And so he's protecting them from maybe some other vulnerable ways they could be harmed or hurt or taken advantage of. Pretty amazing. So he's obligated to take care of her if she is in fact the kinsman redeemer. Ruth does in fact go to Boaz while he's asleep. People always want to talk about the innuendo or whatever in the Hebrew, whatever in this passage. You can do that on your own. It's Christmas time, so let's not make it weird if we don't have to. And so Ruth and Boaz, she's like, please redeem Naomi's family. And so that they have that conversation. You can read that in Ruth. And then Boaz connects with another guy who actually they find out is a closer relative to Naomi and actually should be his kinsman redeemer. So again, this kind of weird thing happens where now Boaz has an out. Like this other guy is actually obligated to do it. And it's kind of funny, the guy is kind of like, you got it. Like, you go ahead. And so Boaz becomes Naomi's redeemer, her kinsman redeemer. Marries Ruth, they bear a son named Obed, and it's so wonderful, so beautiful. It actually says in Ruth that we just read today that they gave Naomi a son. Her husband and her own sons are dead, and God, through Boaz, through all these crazy circumstances, through providence we might say, through a romantic interest, through gleaning in the fields, through unfortunate circumstances, through a mixed racial sort of connection family, through the gossip, through the trouble, through the talking, through everything that happens, gives Naomi a horizon, gives Naomi a hope. It's a beautiful story. It's a wonderful story. And if you read in Exodus 34, there's this passage where God tells Moses he's going to tell Moses his name. And when God tells Moses what his name is, it's actually all of these qualities. And one of those qualities is sometimes translated faithfulness, often loyal love, and it's the Hebrew word hesed. Hesed is this kind of fierce, risky commitment to another party. And God does that over and over and over again with Israel. Ruth does that with Naomi and makes a nobody somebody by her relationship to her. Naomi does that with Ruth. She could have said like, no, really, you don't want me, and they have this connection. They have this familial connection. Ruth and Boaz do this together. They're faithfully, loyal, loving to each other. They give Naomi a son, a line. They're loyally loving to one another. They have hesed, faithfulness to one another. Then it gets passed down. We read this genealogy today that it gets passed down all the way to this person named Jesse, who then gives birth to a son named David, who's then the king of Israel, this superstar, this celebrity in the Jewish world. And through this circumstance, through God's loyal love to this line, through God's loyal love to this family, through God's loyal love to humanity, we might say, something new happens. And if you read in Jesus' genealogy, If you go to Jesus' story in Matthew's gospel, the very, very beginning, some of them start with this, some of them don't. You get just line by line, all the way back from Abraham, who we talked about 2 weeks ago, down to Joseph, who's Jesus' adoptive father, who loyally loves Jesus and connects himself to Mary and connects himself to Jesus, even though he could have had an out. He didn't have to have anything to do with them. Becomes the means by which, the way by which God gives himself to every human ever. This story, this one act of loyal love, we could trace it all the way back. We could trace it back further if we wanted to, but we zero in here where Ruth gives herself to Naomi. You'll be mine, I'll be yours, your God will be my God, your people will be my people, and God does something miraculous through it. This hesed, this commitment, this love, this loyalty. This icon we have in Ruth is something so beautiful that we can then cling to and say, Branches clings to people who say they have no hope. People who follow Jesus cling to people who say they have no horizon, they have no promise of anything. They're economically distraught and destitute. They're culturally kind of cut out. They're outsiders. They're nobody, like Naomi and Ruth were nobodies. And people who follow Jesus say, well, God can take what seems to be a nobody and make them somebody. God can take a situation that seems to have no hope and instill new, miraculous, surprising hope in it. God can use unlikely people like a Moabite who would have, if you would have read it out loud to some groups, they would have hissed at the sound Moabite and use it as the means by which God saves the whole world. To use a family, to use a strange circumstance, to use a surprise, to use God's loyal love reflected in another person, an unlikely person, in a woman, in Ruth. Again, to echo Tim Keller, for Ruth, a woman, a Moabite woman at that, to be a hero would have flown in the face again of the animus toward women, that they were property, they were subservient, they were not as good as men, that they couldn't have any way of wealth, like Meryl Streep's character in Little Women. And it was like, I stayed rich, I'm rich, it's the only way I got to hold on to my money, and if you don't marry rich, then there's no hope for you. That's kind of the same attitude they have here in the Old Testament in the kind of Jewish imagination. And good thing we've risen above that. And it was like total equality now, like everything's good, All right. But that God uses an amazing, miraculous story, a microcosm of God's faithfulness in the person of Ruth, in the person of Naomi, in the person of Boaz. Our charge is then icons of God. If we're going to step out in the world and say, this is who God is again to cling ourselves to attach ourselves to grab hold of hopeless situations and lift them up. I walk in Branches this past week and see all these wrapped presents that we're going to share with people in our community, families whose parents are incarcerated. And again, we see all over, and we hear it in the way people talk, or just kind of the way that people are cast to the side, or kind of unseen, or kind of in the corners or in the margins. There are people whose family members are incarcerated, and it's this is it. We're hopeless now. We have no horizon. We have nothing. And just by this small act, we say that that's not true. And in this Christmas season, that God can do anything, and your God will be my God, and my people will be your people, and we'll walk alongside you, and we're going to cling ourselves to you, because God's love is loyal. My love's going to be loyal to you no matter what, that there are no hopeless situations. Ruth and Naomi were people who had no hope, then were given new hope. Ruth and Naomi had no horizon, had no line, had no wealth, had no thing to cling on to, and they could have gone their separate ways. And Ruth's simple act, a simple act that we can all take tomorrow or today if we wanted to, is to cling ourselves to someone who needs hope. Reflects the name of God that he shared with Moses so early on. I am Hesed, I am loyal love, I am faithful to you, and I'm clinging myself to you. And thanks be to God for that.